Good morning. I'd like to thank you all for joining us to the third annual Excellence in Action Education Reform Summit. I'm Patricia Levesque. I'm the director of the Governor's Foundation for Excellence in Education, and we're going to start this morning with a pledge led by Superintendent-elect of Oklahoma, Janet Barisi.
Will you join me? Stand, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
I don't know what college I want to go to, but I know I want to be a teacher. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor.
How come?
Because I would like to help somebody in need.
You wake up every morning and you know that kids are getting a really crappy education right now.
So you think that most of the kids here are getting a crappy education right now?
Oh, I don't think they are. I know they are.
Either the kids are getting stupider every year, or something is wrong in the education system.
I just try to do my best in school and make my grandmother proud.
Among 30 developed countries, we rank 25th in math and 21st in science. In almost every category, we've fallen behind, except one. Kids from the USA rank #1 in confidence.
I think about 60,000 people have gone to this school in 40 years. 40,000 didn't graduate. This is the damage that this school has done to this neighborhood.
A child that doesn't finish high school will earn less and be 8 times more likely to go to prison.
I want to go to school.
For these kids, their only chance at getting into a great school depends on whether their number is picked in the lottery.
So if Francisco doesn't get in, is there another chance?
No.
Your children and future generations are on the bridge of the Titanic and everybody's gonna drown.
Someone has taken an interest in you, someone loves you, and they recognize the importance of education. And the first student selected, 20.
9.
It takes a lot of outrage and a lot of good examples to say, yes, we can do this.
When you see a great teacher, you are seeing a work of art.
I want my kids to have better than what I had.
18, 10, 12, 2, and the last number,
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. First of all, welcome to Washington, D.C., for those of you who are visiting our glorious nation's capital. A few years ago, if you'd visited Washington, D.C., I don't think you would have thought of us as a place that was taking the tiger by the tail and really trying to fix our schools. That has all changed, as you have seen just in that recent trailer. Over the past 4 years, we have tried to do what all of you have tried to do for years, and that is to put kids first. There's a lot of things that go into putting kids first and making sure that you fix the schools. You all are on the front lines, and you know them by heart. But one of the things I try and emphasize is we need the politicians to stand up. We know there's always going to be opposition towards fixing the schools and improving them, but the politicians have to stop enabling those who are opposed to real reform from having their way. And one man who, when he was in office and every day since, who has stood for those principles, who's told politicians of both parties that the future of this country depends on politicians being brave, being willing to put their careers on the line, and doing the right things for kids. As the former governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, it's my honor to introduce him and to thank him for all of his work on education reform for this country. Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you again soon. Yeah, okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much. Please sit down. Before the mayor departs, I would just want to tell him on behalf of 500 people in this overcrowded room, first of all, we don't want the fire marshal to come, so please don't call back to the home office. But I just want to say that you and Michelle Rhee are the Superman and Superwoman for thousands of kids in D.C. We appreciate what you've done. Thank you for that kind welcome. It is a joy for me to be here, and we welcome you to our third annual Reform Conference. We have people from 34 states. We have 134 lawmakers that are intermingling amongst themselves, learning about really cool ideas they take back home to present to their legislatures. We have over 560 attendees, which is more than double what we had last year. We have over a dozen governors, state school officers, education policy leaders in the governor's offices, and we have a ton of education reformers all across this country that have been doing the Lord's work for a long time. I want to thank the sponsors for making it possible for us to gather together. And when I thought about what I would talk about today, last night, I realized that this is an incredibly diverse group of people with a shared purpose. And in a world that seems to be so divided about so many things, in fact, we almost feel compelled to divide up in our disparate parts even when we agree on things, or at least have enough commonality of purpose where we would pause normally, in the day at least, and find common ground. Here's a group of people, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, that have a shared common purpose, a diverse group, and I think it's important to pause and say that's a good thing. In a country that desperately needs ways to find common ground, for you all to come together on a shared purpose that I think is based on two beliefs is something that warms my heart. First, I think the two beliefs that really undergird this common purpose are that education should be a national priority. Doesn't mean it's going to be a federal program. Just means that it is a national priority. It should be embedded in every policy conversation that we have across the country, because there's no way for our country to be competitive in a world that is increasingly so unless more and more of our young people gain the power of knowledge. In fact, it is a moral imperative that it be a national priority, because as young people begin to dream about what they want to do, if they don't have the tools necessary to achieve those dreams, the societal strains are going to be so huge that it will force us to turn back rather than moving forward. And secondly, we all agree in this diverse group of people that we need systemic change that moves our education system to a student-centered system and away from the adults. So political leaders, state school officers, teachers, principals, folks in the school districts, anybody interested as an adult is secondary to this objective of assuring that children gain a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time. That sounds so simple and so common, but if you talk to the people in the trenches, that's really hard to do, to change the system to make it truly student-centered. So, how are we going to do this? I'm actually incredibly optimistic. There are places in policy world that I'm not so optimistic, but this is a place where I believe we're at a tipping point, and the people in this room, spread out across the land, can make a huge difference going forward. It seems to me that as a national priority, if we have this as a national priority, then we should make sure that children gain a year's worth of knowledge from pre-K all the way to the top, to the end of the K-12 experience, where they're college or career ready. That should be a national aspiration. If we can send someone in the moon in 1960s to respond to the Soviet challenge, it seems to me a great country could have as a national priority that more and more and more of our children gain the power of knowledge. It means, by the way, if we do that we eliminate a tremendous amount of remedial costs that go into the process where we ignore the reality of what we have today. Hundreds of millions, billions of dollars are spent in community colleges and now in our four-year universities for kids to take courses that they didn't get right in high school. It means that if we can get this right, the billions and billions of dollars of lost productivity will be available to be reinvested in our competitive future. And it means that the income gaps based on learning, which is the driver, I think, for the next great challenge in our country, the achievement gap that exists, begins to recede to create all sorts of opportunities for people. I believe that we can do this if we move away from the old way. And so think about it this way. We have 50 states, since this is a thing of national purpose and not a federal program. We have 50 states, and if you take, I don't want to be too pejorative, but we'll take the blob on this side and the perfect idyllic system of education on this. Each state is on a different point on that line, but most of them now are moving towards a child-centered system that is focused on customized learning, that has no tolerance for mediocrity. Most states are moving along that line. Some states are leading, inspiring others to catapult over them. And for the first time in my adult lifetime, I think that we're close to a tipping point where we will see continual progress if we stay focused on these two objectives of making sure that our system is child-centered and that we focus on making education a national priority. To get to that point, it seems to me we need to continue to embrace more school choice across the board and hybrid forms and all sorts of forms that exist today. Those should be accelerated across the land. We should have a laser-like focus on student achievement, which means that each child learns in different ways at different paces, and that we need to mobilize the incredible talents inside and outside the education system to assure that we move to this customized environment. Third, we need to eliminate social promotion as a policy so that the thing that about the Waiting for Superman clip that just blows me away every time I see it is how children feel good about themselves. How their self-esteem is at an all-time high, that we're definitely ranked number one in the world in terms of self-esteem, but when you measure how do we compare with the rest of the world in terms of outcomes, we don't do so well. And social promotion is a policy that is just insidious. That if you start socially promoting children at third grade and you don't hold them back and reinvent how you educate them, you have these tragedies unfold, but long after it's too late, people begin to realize that, this is a tragedy. So it seems to me part of our strategy ought to be in a customized learning environment that the idea of social promotion needs to be blown up. That children learn at their own pace, they advance once they achieve the desired objectives, the benchmarks of our standards, but they don't get passed along forever and ever thinking that we're making them feel better and thinking that that's a good policy. And then finally, the cutting edge of this, I think, is to reward great teachers. Great teachers create an environment where students learn, and yet in America today, we do not pay great teachers what they deserve. They get the same pay based on longevity of service as mediocre teachers, and tragically, horrible teachers continue to teach in our classroom. We need to have the courage, the political courage, to change that dynamic before it's too late. Much has been accomplished in 2010. In one area that I'm so excited about is the question of higher standards. The honest answer to the following question is, how many children are college or career ready when they finish, or when they should be finishing 12th grade in America? The honest answer is 1/3. But because we have low standards, we don't have the honest result based on our data. 1/3 of our children graduate college or career ready. 1/3 graduate from high school more or less, but they do so with the necessity of taking remedial courses, and 1/3 don't graduate at all. If education is a national priority, which it must be, those numbers are shameful. And so, thankfully, states voluntarily have come together to create Common Core standards which It's great that they're common because that creates economies of scale and new ways to assess and exciting ways, I think, to advance the cause of learning. But more importantly, the fact that they're common is that for almost all states, they're significantly higher, that it'll be a reality check. So in Louisiana or Florida or Indiana, when you get to this reality that 1/3 of the children are college or career ready, it will allow the reformers to take the lead in proposing solutions to that great challenge that we have in our country. And so kudos for those that are in this room and other places that are leading the charge to bring about higher standards. And the second element, I think, of great change that has taken place in the last year is this notion that has been part of our history as a nation, which is states are laboratories for innovation and reform. In the last year, there's been tremendous reforms across the United States. And my guess is with 80% of the populace in our country today having a new governor, and many of them having new state school leaders in their states, there will be a burst of energy as it relates to reform for this year as well. Spurred on by Race to the Top, more states have focused on reform than ever before. And equally, and perhaps more important, dozens of states are not waiting for Race to the Top to bring about even more reform. Last year, we challenged all the lawmakers and folks involved in policy to take one good idea from this conference and to steal it and to implement it in their home states. And it appears like a whole lot of people took that idea to heart. Oklahoma and Louisiana created a scholarship for students with disabilities, which allows families to choose the K-12 school that best meets the special needs of their child. Florida created this program in 1999, and since then, Arizona, Georgia, and Utah have adopted similar programs. What are the rest of you waiting for? Florida expanded their tax credit scholarship program. The law raised the scholarship amount as well as the amount that can be claimed in tax credits. More importantly, the budget is now indexed to grow automatically to meet the demand. I know that John Kirtley is in the room somewhere. My expectation is that in a 5 to 7 year period, it is likely that 100,000 students in Florida, low-income students, will be able to move to a private school of their parents' choice based on this program. There were a few setbacks, too. A bipartisan majority in the Illinois Senate passed an incredibly bold piece of legislation to provide vouchers to students in failing schools, but the measure barely failed in the State House. Georgia lawmakers considered a bill to expand choice to students in foster families and military families, as well as to expand their own tax credit law. Several states adopted accountability measures that I believe will help them create a perpetual cycle of reform and improvement. Arizona, Indiana, and Louisiana all adopted the A through F letter scale to grade their schools. You know, it sounds very simple, but I promise you, the A through F scale is a big part of any success because it is so clear and so transparent. You can hide away when you get an incomplete or unsatisfactory. You don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but an F is an F and an A is an A, and people strive for improvement. To have accountability that is based on student learning and having a clear grading system is the way to go, and states have begun to embrace that idea. Each state is implementing these policies in different ways to adapt to the uniqueness of their state. Indiana did it by rule, which is what forceful leaders do when they are impatient with their legislatures. Arizona and Louisiana did it by the old-fashioned way of getting consensus with their legislature. I don't think it really matters how to do it. The fact is that they're aggressively pursuing it. Literacy got a big boost this year as well. Arizona, Indiana, and Utah, the names are beginning to sound quite familiar, I guess, adopted a policy to end social promotion for students who can't read by the end of 3rd grade, which, as we all know, is when students transition from learning to read to reading to learn. I wish every state, as I mentioned, adopted a harder edge policy of no tolerance for functional illiteracy at any grade, but 3rd grade is a great place to start. My hope is also that we raise standards across the board. I know that many states preparing for Common Core standards are requiring higher coursework. For example, Florida last year passed a law that requires the state students to graduate to pass Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, biology, and either chemistry or physics. That should not be such a provocative, radical idea, by the way. but many states have not even gotten to that point. And it seems to me that if we have zero tolerance for mediocrity and poor results, raising the standards and raising the bar in terms of coursework is another part of this renaissance of change and reform that's necessary. The one issue, if you look back on 2010, that I think defines the education reform movement in this last year was characterized by one big issue, which is modernizing the way teachers are evaluated, compensated, and retained. Great teachers make great students. It's just that simple. You can have all the data you want with great professors and researchers from really fine universities that can validate that, but it is so intuitive, it's so obvious that great teachers will create great students. It seems to me that we need to tear away the vestiges of the past and focus on assessing teachers on student performance, and then rewarding them when they do a job well done. Again, states across the country are leading the way in reform. 12 states, Arizona, Colorado, Delaware, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Maryland, New York, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Tennessee, and Washington, and the District of Columbia advanced meaningful reforms to transform the teaching profession. Louisiana and Colorado, in my mind, stand out in terms of the most comprehensive reforms in place, and they truly deserve credit for the courageous efforts to begin that process. Which brings me to one of the lessons of reforms, that states can learn from each other. They can learn what works and what doesn't. We can avoid the mistakes of the past, and you can imitate their success. There's no trademark on a good idea or accurate implementation. And I hope that from this conference, you have the contagion of reform and you can share your ideas and learn from others along the way. So where to from here? It seems to me, my hope is that we make it commonplace that we advance the cause of customization through technology. And at this conference, we will unveil what we hope will be the benchmarks for digital learning that states can apply to implement policies to tear down the barriers of entry for great teachers through technology, and to advance the cause of accelerated learning. Second, we need to accelerate new assessment tools to protect accountability. Accountability is tough. It's like my dad being told he had to eat his broccoli when he was a kid. After a while, it just kind of wears you out when you're focused on the harder edge nature of accountability. And one of the vulnerabilities of accountability is that the current or the older technologies as it relates to assessment make it harder to defend accountability. If you take a test in February or March, it's hard to say that you're trying to measure a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time when 3 more months of learning is taking place. So using assessments that are more flexible, that are easier to apply, will protect accountability, which is a huge element in assuring that every child matters in a state. The third thing that I think ought to be a goal of this group is to create policies that move away from funding seat time towards performance-based funding. And that could apply across the board. Florida Virtual School is a great example of that, where when students complete the course and pass it, they get compensated. If they don't, they don't get paid. That sounds like a pretty radical idea, but believe me, across the spectrum of life, that happens all the time, and it could happen more often, I think, in education. Why should Title I money just be sent to the states without any element of reform? Seems to me, working with the states, Title I money could be used as a catalyst for continual reform that is performance-oriented. Think about the ways that you could move your funding towards the expectations that you want, the results that you want, and there are a whole myriad of ways that we can begin that process of moving towards performance pay. And one final point, back to the beginning of my speech, when there is common ground, we should pause and celebrate it and find creative ways to build on it. So I am excited that Secretary Arne Duncan is coming to close out our conference tomorrow. It seems to me, we have huge issues in our country. Conservatives are worried about the debt and the deficit. We have ways to solve it. Liberals have a different view on that and have a different way to solve it. And there'll be a big food fight in Washington. And for those that love politics, it'll probably be fun to watch on the sidelines. Just stay away from the spew zone, if you will, so you don't get dirty. But I hope that this one place, education, is a place where we can put aside the partisan divide and focus on the important things. And I'm excited that I believe that that can happen. We have some fantastic state school officers here today that will share with you their views about the reforms that they want to implement. I hope that Secretary Duncan creates a dialogue with them to be able to build the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind in a way that is meaningful to advance the cause of reform. I hope that Republicans in Congress work with the Obama administration to make this the one place to prove to the American people that Democrats and Republicans can put aside partisanship and still be true to their convictions and their principles, but to find common ground for a long-term strategy to assure that more children learn. If this conference is a catalyst for that, so be it. That makes me incredibly happy. Thank you all very much for coming, and enjoy these next 2 days. God bless.
We still have more for our morning session, but we need to make a slight stage change. So you have a 5-minute break opportunity for more coffee and bathroom. Be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
The problem is not the parents, the problem is not the children, the problem is a system that protects academic failure.
Parents are literally fleeing their zone schools as they vie for seats in charter schools.
A child's destiny should not be determined on the pull of a draw.
Every year we wait to offer parents the choices they deserve is a year in which children's futures are destroyed.
100% of our children ace the exam.
These charter schools do not have enough space to take care of all of the people who want to be there.
The United Federation of Teachers is trying to halt the progress and put the interests of adults above the interests of children.
Y'all are not welcome here! We will not welcome you here!
We're trying to really transform somebody's life, and that is not an easy thing to do.
Look at your children. They want to become doctors. They want to become maybe the next president.
I am Barack Obama.
You look a little bit like him in that suit.
No, I feel a lot like him.
If every one of us wrote the leadership and said, look, I demand that you take a stand on education, we would make this a better country for all of our children.
You got everybody in Harlem here tonight, huh?
What can I do? I just waited for the lotto.
You can see a lot of hope in a lot of parents' eyes.
I know this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Here we go.
Good morning again. Welcome back. I'm Kathleen Dulaski from the Walton Family Foundation, and just one remark about the two movie clips you've seen. Both these two movies, The Lottery and Waiting for Superman, have been shortlisted for the Oscars. That's another sign of how far we've come. Yeah. So I have the privilege of introducing the state chiefs, the coolest job in education reform now, and we have 6 very cool champions of education reform, as well as Michelle Bernard, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Independent Women's Forum, and you've probably seen her on MSNBC as a political analyst. She will be moderating the panel. And I'm going to just quickly go down the line and introduce the chiefs. We'll start with Dr. Tony Bennett. He's Indiana's Superintendent of Public Instruction, and he needs no introduction. As a bold reformer, during Dr. Bennett's first meeting, the State Board of Education approved reforms to facilitate student-centered learning and remove many burdensome regulations. And Dr. Bennett also served as a classroom science teacher, so he's got those bona fides as well. Deborah Gist, who hails from our fair city here in D.C., she made quite a name for herself there and then went on to become Rhode Island's Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. I'm sure you've seen Deborah in the news. She's made national news since coming to Rhode Island. She has visited every school district, every charter school, and state-operated school, and she's developed and published Transforming Education in Rhode Island, a strategic plan for public education in our state. Next, we have Paul Pastorek, who many of you know as well, Louisiana's State Superintendent of Education. Superintendent Pastorek has a history of working in education, has served from 1996 to 2004, including the last 3 years as president of the board. In 2004, he formed Next Horizon, a nonprofit organization that serves as a statewide think tank to connect Louisiana's leadership as a force for supporting school improvement. Next, we have Gerard Robinson from Virginia, who came from next door, and many of you may know him as working with BAO, Black Alliance for Educational Opportunities, a national nonprofit which has a mission to actively support parental choice to empower families and increase quality educational options for Black children. Gerard is also a former teacher. And last but not least, certainly we have Eric Smith, who is Florida's Commissioner of Education. And you began your career in Florida more than 30 years ago, also as a classroom teacher. And Eric's commitment to effecting positive change in education led him to several administrative positions in Florida school districts, and eventually to 16 years of serving as a district superintendent in 3 other states. So these superintendents and commissioners are on the front lines, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle so you can hear their story.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We are so excited to be here today, and I wanted to start off this discussion this morning with just a short story that I think is really important for everybody who cares about education and believes that education is the great equalizer, as I do. Years ago, Doug Wilder was just elected governor of the state of Virginia. First African-American elected to the governor's position in the state of Virginia. So there was a lot of celebration throughout the nation among everybody throughout the country. And shortly after he was elected, I ran into Governor Wilder somewhere, and he told me that he was speaking to a little girl. She was in elementary school, and she didn't understand all of the hoopla behind his election. And he couldn't understand why she didn't understand all of the hoopla. And she told him that she didn't understand how he could be the governor of the state of Virginia because all of our heroes were dead. Now, it was really disturbing for a lot of reasons, but most importantly, it was very telling because what it told us was that this little girl in her school system where she lived in the state of Virginia did not have any role models to look up to. And she really had no hopes or understanding of what her future could look like. So when you hear stories like that, one of the questions that myself and other people, ask is, whose fault is that? I will tell you, many years ago, I was at an event being hosted by one of the nation's leading teachers unions here in Washington, D.C. And one of the leaders of this teachers union said, there is no such thing as a failing school. And I thought to myself, well, if the schools aren't failing, who is failing? If the children are failing, it is not because they can't learn. It is not because of the zip code that they live in. It is not because of their race. It is not because of where their parents come from. So if the kids are failing, why is that? It was not, when she made this statement, it was nothing to be proud about. It is a question that has plagued us, particularly a few years ago when we were all celebrating the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. Many of us sat around and thought, it is wonderful to celebrate, but what would Thurgood Marshall say if he could look at our public education system today? If he were alive, what would he say to us about the lack of school choice, about the fact that our public education system has been set up to work for adults and not for children? What would he say about the children whose parents cannot take their dollars and put their children in schools that work? What would he say about the permanent underclass of poor children, of Latino, of poor whites, of rural children, of poor Black children that can't get access to the best education possible that our nation has to offer, what would Thurgood Marshall say? So I think in that context, it's a great way to start our discussion today. How do we, I think the greatest nation on earth, change our public education system so that we serve all of the nation's children, no matter what their race, sex, gender, zip code? Every child deserves a fundamentally excellent education, and that's why we're here today. So thank you, and we'll get started. We're going to start with Tony, Indiana's Superintendent of Public Education. Superintendent Bennett, earlier this year, Indiana adopted A through F grading of its public schools. Would you tell us about that process and how you believe it will transform school accountability in Indiana?
Well, first, Michelle, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that A through F is the first step. A through F for us, and in all states, is only the first step. It is not the end-all for accountability. In Indiana today, we announced this last week, in Indiana today we have 3/4 of our high schools that are in the lowest 2 rungs of our state's accountability model. So they are on what we will soon used to refer to as probation and academic watch. Now, does that really compel anyone to action? So if we said that 75% of those high schools were D and F schools, would that compel communities to act? Would that compel school boards to act? Would that compel superintendents to act? So for us, the whole idea was, let's be very clear, let's be very honest, let's be very transparent about how our schools perform. But again, I said that's the first step. The second step is you have to do something about it. You can call people failures all you want, but until states have the courage to step in, and it really is the state's responsibility, one, to set standards, get out of the way of the locals as they jump over those standards, and if they don't, hold them accountable quickly for the children. So we see A through F as a two-step process. We see first, making sure these grades are clear, fair, and transparent, that they differentiate the best from the worst, and 2, that we will have the courage to intervene and do what's best for the children in those D and F communities so that our children go to schools that prepare them for the future.
What's the response been of, for example, the teachers' unions in Indiana to this?
Well, I'm
sure they loved it.
You know, Michelle, as we start December, I don't think I'll run to the mailbox for Christmas cards, okay? I think we have to first understand that it's not just the teachers' unions. We actually had superintendents come to our state board hearing, and the Governor Bush mentioned we did this through rulemaking because for us that was the best process. We actually had superintendents who attended and said this: we don't want to move to A to F grades because our current system is confusing and we like that. And another one said, we've never had to explain our school's performance and now we're going to have to. So it wasn't just the teachers' unions, but I think that the teachers' unions have been very galvanized against all of the reforms we're after. And as have many of the other special interest groups. And I think the takeaway for us has been, and Paul and I were talking about this earlier, as I talk to legislators, as I talk to state chiefs, my strong suggestion is go right to the belly of the beast. You have to have the courage, what you say in the State House, your talking points, you have to walk out in your communities, look teachers in the eye, look superintendents in the eye, look community members in the eye and say, this is what we're for, this is what we're about because it's best for children. You can't say one thing behind closed doors and another one out in the communities. So we have gone right to the teachers, we've gone right to the teacher unions, we've gone right to the superintendents, principals, school boards associations, and we've said to them, this is what we're for, do you have a better idea?
And the answer?
Well, they're still working on their ideas.
Let me ask you, how do you separate? I think it's important, all of us believe that teaching is such an honorable profession. And when we talk about comprehensive education reform, we're not saying that all teachers are horrible. But there are some teachers, I don't think any of us should kid ourselves, that should not be in the classroom, just as there are some principals who should not be in the classroom. So when we talk about, for example, a teachers union appearing to be set up to help teachers rather than students, how do you separate that out in terms of the public discourse in Indiana so people understand this is not an attack on teachers? Teachers are the key to success for every student. The teachers union is something completely different.
Well, you know, first we just go very clearly and say, we're not vilifying teachers. As a matter of fact, I would ask everyone in this audience today, what do all bad teachers have in common? One characteristic. You said it. You said it. The one characteristic of all bad teachers is they've worked for an administrator who has done nothing about them. Okay, so we can vilify teachers all we want, but we have to acknowledge the fact that schools should be in the business of running intense, robust, rigorous personnel departments to make sure that we recognize and reward the best and that we remediate and we remove those who have no business in front of our children. We have to have those, we have to make those courageous decisions, and we have to have those courageous discussions.
Obviously, I'm totally on board with everything you just said. My question is, how do you fight the opposition to that? It seems so fundamental. You know, in many school districts, it seems that being a teacher is the only job in the country where you never have to worry about losing your job. Well, how do you get over the opposition to the fact that poor performing teachers should not be in the classroom?
Invite the debate. You know, you said it earlier. Invite the debate. You know, we've tried very hard to go right into the communities, look right in the teachers and say, this is what we're for. This is what we're about. We are about professionalizing the most noble vocation in the United States. We're about that. We're about making sure that our best teachers are recognized and rewarded. What are you for? And we always say, this is a debate. This is not a discussion. We will not solve this by sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya. Let's hear your ideas. Let's hear what you think, but this is what we're for, and the debate does not include me fighting for reforms and you fighting for the status quo. That's off limits. And so when we go to that level, it is amazing that the teachers themselves engage. We have teachers, I'm getting emails now from teachers who say, you know what? I really thought you were the boogeyman. And now, this is starting to make a little bit of sense because we've rolled out a growth model that is going to be very transparent for parents. And we are saying to teachers, you're no longer responsible for the achievement of a child from last year, the year before. You should be evaluated, like Governor Bush said, on a year of academic growth in a year of instruction. And when we start saying those things, it's like, that makes sense. So I think you have to have the courage to go right to the professionals. And these are intelligent, caring people. They all got in this business because they love and care for children. So let's take that off the table. And we should have the debate with them, in front of them, on their turf, and say, this is what we're for. Come to us and tell us what you're for.
Well, I liked when you said we should go to the belly of the beast, and so just quickly, I want to talk about the belly of the beast as you described it in the Lafayette Journal and Courier. You described Indiana's education system as a mess, and you've even gone so far as to chart it out. And I was wondering if you could just talk to us a little bit about the method to the madness.
Well, first, I can't take any credit for this. I think the slide is going to be put up. I'm not sure, but this, I got this. This was a diagram that I actually stole.
And we apologize if you need a Valium to actually figure out what that says.
This is a diagram we put together. I heard a gentleman by the name of Ian Mitroff speak at a principal leadership forum, and he did this with the BP oil spill, is actually what he did. And his point is this, and I think if you look at all those things, you will see things that are really, really very characteristic of your individual states. You know, 23,000 kids being past third grade, from third grade to fourth grade who can't read, 25,000 dropouts. And my point with this is, we can't do one thing and fix this mess. One fix. We can sit here all day and say more charter schools. That's not going to fix that. We can say improving teacher quality all by itself. That's not going to fix that. We can say, a growth model. It's not going to fix that. So we are of the mind that to fix Indiana's mess, you have to have a comprehensive education reform package. It is not one thing. If you're not going to go after 4 pillars, 3 or 4 pillars, which we are in this state in our legislative session coming up, if you're not going to go after 4 structural issues, 3 or 4 that really address the cornerstones of that mess, you will not clean up that mess in your state. Because what has happened in education is we've one-offed ourselves into oblivion. We've all chased that one thing, gotten measured just very small or no results, which has allowed the defenders of the status quo to see, that doesn't work. So now, go after structural reform, go after it in a comprehensive manner so that you can really attack the mess.
Well, talking about attacking the mess, Rhode Island, how do we love thee? So, Deborah, last year you announced that staffing decisions would be based on teacher qualifications rather than seniority.
Right? Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine?
Only in America. You also introduced a new teacher evaluation system whereby educators receive annual reviews. Tell us about these decisions and why you decided the status quo wasn't working.
Sure. Well, I think, there are a lot of things that we all wish we had more information about in education and better research and lots of questions that we have about what works in education. But there are a few things that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And as the governor said earlier, one of them is that our education system will be no better than the quality of the teachers that we have. And so both of the examples that you gave are reflective of our theory of action, which is that when we have an excellent teacher in every classroom and great school leaders, our students are going to achieve it at higher levels. And so what that means is that at every step along the way, we have to make sure that the systems that we have in place are ensuring that we have those great educators, that we're developing them, that we're supporting them, and making sure that we're moving folks out if they're not able to improve and serve our students well. And so, seniority is a great example, and I think that there's just nothing more important than the decisions that we make, that principals make, that superintendents make, about who is going to be in a classroom to serve the students of that class. And when those decisions are taken out of the hands of those school and district leaders, and it becomes just a matter of a calculation, then that is it's the opposite of doing what we need to do, which is to make sure that we're making those decisions based on what children need. And Tony and I were actually talking yesterday that it gets so ludicrous that it gets to the point where in a contract in our state, if all things are equal, you flip a coin. And I think in your state, there's an example of rolling the dice, that's the level that we take this we're going to take all human elements out of this. At the same time, you have to think about why those structures were put into place in the first place. And so, I'm sure it varies from place to place, but what I understand from the educators in our state is that, previously, decisions were made for who was going to go into a classroom or get a certain job based on things like cronyism and nepotism and corruption even. And so, and there weren't good tools to be able to tell us, to help us distinguish between quality educators and less qualified folks, because we didn't have strong evaluation systems. In fact, if you looked at the evaluation systems, for the most part, everybody was great. And so because of that, the seniority came about to be an objective way of making sure that there was fairness in the system. So you have to acknowledge that that was the case. And so when you get the fear and the anxiety and the stress that some folks have about no longer making those decisions based on seniority, you have to acknowledge that. And then you have to make sure that what you're putting in its place is a system that is accurate, that is fair, that gives you high quality information about quality, And then you obviously also experience in certain grades or subject areas also is something that should be considered. So for the most part, in our state, across the state, community members, parents in particular, and even students are absolutely celebrating this decision. I think any of us, when we have experiences talking with students, that's when all of these crazy things that adults do become just so real. When they look at you like, what are you talking about? Why would you do that? So for example, I was meeting with a group of students a few weeks ago, and they don't have the right words, because they don't know things like seniority or things like that, these terms that we use. But they can explain to you very clearly and say, we had a band teacher. He was great. He took us, we went all over the country on band trips, and we practiced all the time, and he loved the band, and he was such a great teacher, and he was so inspiring, and everybody was so excited. And then he just wasn't there anymore. And somebody came to be the band teacher who didn't even like band, didn't even know anything about band, didn't want to take us on trips, and that's now our band teacher. And that doesn't seem fair. And I heard it was because that teacher had been there for longer, and that's not fair. And that's, I think we have to take it down to that level of it's just basic decisions that we're making and why we're making them.
Deborah, let me ask you about the Central Falls decision from last year, and I'm sure I'm not alone in the room. I was like clapping wildly when I was watching the evening news that night and saw what happened in Rhode Island. Not because I was excited that teachers lost their jobs, but I was excited by the fact that somebody was taking a stand and actually beginning to look at the education system and do something in terms of challenging the status quo. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it and what was the outcome. I know that Secretary Arne Duncan weighed in on behalf of the state of Rhode Island in favor of what you all did there, but could you tell us a little bit about the outcome? It was interesting to watch in a lot of the evening news coverage that night. There were actually children who were very upset about it and were weeping. And parents were very, very upset about the decision. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little about the outcome.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you that the attention that Central Falls has received has been very difficult, I think, for all of us to have that kind of a spotlight shine on a tiny little community. This is a 1 square mile community in our state, the smallest and the one with the highest poverty. And it has a high school that has just persistently not performed. I think the statistic that most people know is that only 7% of the students are proficient in mathematics. Fewer than half are graduating from high school. It's unacceptable. And the situation was not that. Many people perceived that what we were doing or what happened was the result of a belief that the teachers in that school were to blame for the performance and therefore they all had to, go. And I think most people know the subtleties of that was actually not the decision. In fact, the superintendent, her name is Dr. Fran Gallo, actually she and the community group that they brought together originally had decided on a model called transformation, which would actually mean that the teachers in the school could stay at the school. But they knew that things were going to have to be different. So what they wanted to keep their team intact, but to make some significant changes. So for example, changes in the length of the school day. And there was previously a 4.5-hour instructional day. You're not going to help students achieve, any student, but particularly students that are struggling to be able to achieve in that kind of a length of a school day. So they wanted to lengthen the school day. They wanted to provide before and after school tutoring support for which the teachers would be paid. The community group, the stakeholder group decided that they wanted to have teachers having lunch with the students once a week, just to build rapport and so forth. So these were things that came out of that group, and there were 6 things on this list. And they weren't able to reach agreement. And the leader of the teachers union said, the superintendent sent her a letter when it got down to the wire and said, okay, can you agree to these 6 things so that we can move forward together? Knowing full well what the next step would be, they said, no, we don't agree. And so that's when and because of state law, they were moving to turnaround, which meant that she could actually keep up to 50% of the teachers. But according to state law, they had to notify everyone, and then hence the attention and so forth. So what happened after that was actually that the teachers union decided that they wanted to agree to these 6 things, and actually
they might lose dues, huh?
and actually agreed to those 6 things and several other things that were really significant to the reform effort. And the superintendent, to her credit, brought them back to the table and said, let's talk through this. We provided a mediator, and they worked it out. And they went back to the transformation model. Now, I'll tell you, the school is struggling this year. This kind of work is not easy, and it can't be fixed just by choosing a model and implementing it, or even doing things like lengthening a school day or providing additional professional development or whatnot. So I remain, obviously, there will be no circumstance in which Central Falls High School or our other lowest achieving schools are not transformed, are not turned around. That's unacceptable. But we remain hopeful, but we're watching it very closely, and we'll see.
Thank you. Well, speaking of transformation, Paul, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, yet Louisiana has transformed its education system in New Orleans through charter schools and more options for parents. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us some of the story of transformation in New Orleans.
Well, New Orleans is a wonderful example of breaking up the monopoly. Public education is arranged in a series of regional monopolies. Every local school district has control over the provision of education for the public at large. And those monopolies are not responsive, generally speaking, because monopolies, by definition, I think I learned that in economics 101. They're not efficient and they're not responsive. So what we talked about in the New Orleans situation for 25 years, a totally failing school academically, financially, and facilities-wise, totally bankrupt for 25 years. Kids being produced in shameful ways. A Democratic governor, after the storm, had the courage to take over the schools and put them under state control and say that's enough. And said collective bargaining agreements will not attach to the transfer of these schools. So in an instant, collective bargaining, which had hamstrung the city for many, many years, was over. And what we did was we said, okay, now we have a clean slate. What are we going to do? Well, let's not do the monopoly thing again. Let's not just put a superintendent in charge and run the 87 schools that we're going to take over from the local school system. Let's decentralize the system, and let's create an opportunity for innovation and creativity to rise up from the ground level, from the teacher level, from the principal level. Let's have those people figure out how to solve the problem, because Paul Pastorek in Baton Rouge is not going to figure out how to solve the problem. And frankly, the district superintendent is not going to figure out how to solve the problem. It's the people in the classroom who are going to figure out how to solve the problem, when we empower them and give them room to maneuver. And so in New Orleans, what we said is structurally, we're going to change the whole monopoly system. No more monopoly. We're going to create clusters of schools. Feeder schools will feed into high schools, and we'll take a cluster of schools. And we'll take the best and brightest leaders who show promise, and we'll give them another school and another school. So we don't have a principal of a school. We have principal leaders who take over clusters of school because they've shown that they have what it takes to drive creativity and innovation from their team. And so we've also pumped up the pipeline and quality of teachers and leaders coming to New Orleans. In partnership with New Leaders for New Schools, the New Teacher Project, and Teach for America, we have one of the most robust human capital pipelines feeding into New Orleans. Now, it was pretty remarkable because New Orleans, after the storm, had very little housing. It was a violent city, and it was really hard to attract people in. but through the foundation support, Gates, Walton, Rhode, Fisher, they gave us some real money to be able to generate a lot of human capital movement into New Orleans. And so the combination of a pipeline of high-quality people coming into the city to teach and lead, coupled with a decentralized system where the best and brightest lead schools and generate creativity and initiative, has given us a lot of movement. We've seen growth in New Orleans that has been far surpassing anything that we've ever seen in any other similar type of situation. Now, we have a long way to go. It took 25 years to get into this mess, and we're into it for about 3.5 years now in a real way, though Katrina was 5 years. The system really didn't operate for 1.5 years, to be honest with you. We have a long way to go, but it shows a lot of promise. We have 65% of the kids going to charter schools in New Orleans, and it's the charter school structure that has allowed us to decentralize. Charter schools are not per se the answer. Getting back to Tony, there's not one solution, but when you combine a strategy of human capital, decentralized schools, charter schools, you can really get and generate a lot of leverage and get some excitement going about it. And we're now working on translating that very same type of activity throughout the rest of the state.
If you had to say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most important, the most critical element to education reform, what number would you assign to the importance of the introduction of competition into the public education system? We see how important it is in the private sector.
10 out of 10. I mean, one of these days, we're going to figure out that competition in public education will drive success. Let me just tell you how incredible this is. People think that we all have to worry about the kids and the kids can't be competitive. The kids are going to be living in a competitive world, not community, but world. We have to prepare them, and we have to show them how competition can be done properly, not dog-eat-dog, but properly. And the best way to do that is to have our schools be competitive. So, when you give people choice, you give them an option, they march with their feet. And in New Orleans, they're marching with their feet. Not only do we have charter schools, we have vouchers in New Orleans. Kids who are held up in chronically low-achieving schools, even schools taken over by the state, because some are still chronically low-achieving, those kids get a pass. They can leave. And guess what? They do. And parents, you don't see as many parents in New Orleans who are crying because they didn't win a lottery. Because there are many, many options for these kids. So when we get this competitive environment going, you don't have to drive the answers from the top. You don't have to mandate all kinds of laws. I met with a foundation yesterday and I said, listen, I know you want us to change the curriculum and you want us to teach teachers how to teach the curriculum. And boy, we're just going to work real hard on teaching them how to teach the curriculum. But it's a little like pushing a rope uphill if you're trying to teach them in an environment where there is no competition. Competition at the end of the day is going to be what sets public schools free. I'll give you one final example. In New Orleans, the best high school in the entire state is a magnet school called Ben Franklin High School. And if you look it up, it's one of the best in the South. Everybody's clamoring to get in, but there's only one Ben Franklin High School before the storm. A waiting list a mile long. Well, why don't we have 10? Empty the waiting list. Well, guess what? After the storm, we created 2 new high schools that are now competing with Ben Franklin. I went to meet with the principal of Ben Franklin the other day, and he said, I told my teachers, they have to get out and recruit students to come to this school. And they said, no, we don't. We're Ben Franklin. And he said, look at our waiting list. It's only about 10. And look at that school over there. They got a waiting list of 1,000. We're going to go out of business if we don't compete. So
So I'm going to cut you off quickly. On the note of competition, Gerard, digital learning, Virginia. What's it going to do to competition? Why is it so important for the state of Virginia?
10 months ago, Governor Bob McDonnell was inaugurated as the 71st governor of the Commonwealth. And he identified in his inaugural speech the importance of education to the economic and social well-being of Virginia. And to help have a state discussion about that, we had a Innovate to Educate Summit in October. In fact, Arnie Duncan was our keynote speaker in the morning, and Tom Vander Ark spoke at lunch. And part of what we wanted to highlight were some of the new laws we have in place. One of them is a new online learning law. Now, at the higher education level, Virginia has been very strong in providing digital learning, digital content material to students. We also have that at the K-12 level. We have Virtual Virginia out of our Department of Education. We also have a Virtual Virginia Academy worked in partnership with K-12. But we also know that we have to move further and farther and faster than we have as a Commonwealth, because the children who will inherit the seats of government and our institutions of higher learning learn very differently than us. And so we wanted to make sure that it happened. So we made sure a new law is in place, and this law was also supported by our Teachers Association, by our School Board Association, and by our Superintendent Association, because we believe that education in the big picture really isn't a partisan issue. It's an issue of making sure that our well-being is in place. And so with our new law, we plan to see more children taking advantage of online learning. In the one statewide academy we have, there are approximately 400 students there. Approximately 10 months ago, there were about 48. Major growth, number of people still waiting to get into that school. It's a nice mix of students, those from public schools, some from charter schools, some from home schools, a great way of bringing the community into the public sphere. And so for us, digital learning is important because we see that as a wave of the future, and also it's cost effective in ways we don't understand. And in a state with very large rural and county systems, there's simply some educators who have an expertise that may not be in that area that we can use digital learning to move forward.
Do you think there's a lot of growth in the digital learning sector that could have a positive impact on, particularly on low-income and minority students?
Absolutely. We have a Beyond the Textbook initiative in Virginia. There were 4 school divisions that recently received a grant through one of the governor's initiatives, a fund that we have, to allow 300 students to get rid of their history textbook and to use basically digital criteria to support their learning of history, and it's linked to our SOL, our standards of learning. It's going to help low-income kids in 3 ways. Number one, many of our students, for a host of reasons, don't have access to some of the best resources. We've known that for over 50 years. Here's a way of helping close that achievement gap. Number 2 is going to support teachers in the area of professional development and also in curriculum and content learning. And third is going to allow superintendents to be able to attract some teachers who are competent in that area, but it's also going to give us an opportunity when we need to attract not only businesses to the Commonwealth, but residents to say, you know, we're a digitally important state. We're also second behind California in the number of technology workers, and so this is important. But for some reason, our low-income and working-class families, for a host of reasons, have not always benefited, and under this administration, we'll make sure we close that gap.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Eric, one of my favorite former governors, named Jeb Bush, likes to say that, quote, success is never final and reform is never finished, which I think is very important in the context of what we're discussing today. And Florida has just been absolutely amazing in the last few years in ensuring that student achievement continues to rise and in closing the achievement gap, particularly in the Hispanic community. And I'm just wondering, you know, what is the Florida formula for success?
Yeah, great question, and I agree with you. It starts with formula for success, first of all, is great state leadership, such as we found in Governor Bush, that has a view of what needs to happen. You spoke in your opening remarks about education, public education being the great equalizer. And it is, and it should be. And if we're not, we're perpetuating the status quo in society as well as in student achievement, student performance, and we simply can't tolerate that as a state or a nation. If you go back to the data to the late 1990s and see where Florida was, our mess chart, Tony, would have been an incredible mess chart. It would have rivaled the Indiana mess chart up there. And I agree that the approach to reform, in order to go after it, it needs to be detailed and specific, targeted, but it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to go after the whole issue of public education in the state. And So I would click off a couple of the major pillars, the major elements of what's helped Florida transform and change for young people. One is the accountability system, and that gets a lot of very quick conversation about accountability. I'm all for accountability, but it's what do you mean by that, and define accountability. And the accountability in Florida, I put it in the perspective this way, that our accountability program in Florida was built around the interests of parents and children. And if you want to have an accountability program, you can have some obscure definition of success and failure and wins and losses that nobody can understand, even the educators. Or you can design an accountability program that's easily understood by the most highly educated, most academically aggressive parents in your state, as well as those that perhaps might be less informed and less involved in day-to-day public education and less educated themselves. And so Florida's move to letter grades that is easily understood by mom and dad and by communities is an incredible lever for change. The details into that, how you build that structure about what kind of things do you want to see happening in your state. In Florida, under our accountability, under those letter grades, you're going to find absolute performance of students, but you're also going to see good rewards given to schools that produce learning gains with children, that move kids forward. And you're going to see a premium placed on those schools that are able to deal with their bottom quartile, the kids at the traditionally and historically underserved children in the state. And so when you talk about the gains in Hispanic Latino, when you talk about the gains in our African American population, the absolute gains, the reduction of the gap, those are some of the major drivers. Building that accountability program against tough standards that make many educators question whether they're able to achieve that level or not is critical. A second piece is when you let mom and dad know and they don't like what they know, then what are they going to do about it? And as Paul mentioned, they've got to be able to take action on that. And so an aggressive effort to provide choice in Florida, both vouchers and charter schools. But moving beyond that, the Florida Virtual School is a form of parental choice. You can have a child in a charter school. You can have a child homeschooled. You can have a child in a traditional school and still participating in their own choice with them and their family about another electronic version of delivery of instruction, which is extraordinarily powerful and is being taken advantage of in Florida to a great extent. The third element that I think is critical is redefining the role of the state and the school districts. That we want to be as much hands-off as possible for schools that are doing well and showing signs of improvement. We think that the state has a state interest in being critically involved in decisions about and operations around schools that have failed communities, have failed children, have failed parents for decades. And so we get more aggressively involved, understanding that at the end of the day, it is the superintendent and the board that's going to have to make some tough decisions about the future, but we're going to be partners in that decision-making process, and working hand in hand with that effort is a critical piece. So I think these are some of the elements that have helped to drive this. I've been a commissioner now for 3 years. And there is a consistency of thought about how school reform should operate in Florida. I do go across the street and are explaining a little bit to the legislature about what's going on here and there, getting some pretty lively debates about it. But there is an understanding and a commitment out of the legislature in Florida about accountability. I don't have to debate that point with people in decision-making roles. And that consistency has allowed us to move from our fledgling years back in the early part of this decade to greater refinement around high school graduation requirements, what is expected of kids, to what do we call by that, what does that diploma mean to a child, aggressively going after fuzzying up the boundaries between post-secondary and secondary, helping kids to accelerate, and when they're not ready to accelerate, to remediate earlier in the high school experience, to go after things about what do you call a graduate? Is a GED a high school graduate or not? And what we find in our efforts, and I think this has been historic over the last 10 years, is that when the adults come together and agree on what appears to be, perhaps at that point in time, a lofty goal and expectation for our children in Florida, and I think across the nation, our children every time will rise to the expectation. It's those low expectations that will be the death sentence for this country. Absolutely. And so when we raise graduation requirements, our kids get busy and they achieve. When we say a GED doesn't count, we see kids graduating one of the largest jumps in standard graduation requirements in Florida this last year as that move took place. So I'm very confident with our State Board of Education, the consistency of thought with our legislative support and the support of superintendents and teachers across the state that we're going to continue to see this kind of progress.
Thank you very much. Quickly, before we go to Q&A, I'm not even sure if we have much time, but I wanted to ask you, Paul, Chiefs for Change. What is Chiefs for Change?
So we are banding together. The 5 of these folks here are banding together under a title called Chiefs for Change. It was an effort to try to figure out how we could collectively move more aggressively and more quickly to address the real hardcore challenges that we face as a nation and also in our states. We had some conversations. All 5 of us belong to an organization called the Chief State School Officers Association. And the Chief State School Officers essentially are all 50 of folks like us who get together and who manage issues for our different states and manage particular important matters. But we felt like, in addition to our participation in CCSSO, or the Chief State School Officers Association, we needed to set ourselves apart and pursue a much more aggressive path towards success. In Louisiana, we have 650,000 kids, 230,000 of them are below grade level. It's absolutely imperative that we move more quickly to address those issues. There are other different challenges that my colleagues have. So we worked together over the last 6 months and talked about how could we collectively push the envelope on these important changes that needed to be made. We talked to Eric. Eric talked to Governor Bush. Governor Bush agreed to provide us with some resources and provide us with some staff so that we could organize ourselves. We don't really look at ourselves as a partisan effort. We look at ourselves as adults who believe fundamentally that children need to be placed in the forefront of every decision that we make. And if we keep them if that is the lens through which we make every decision, and that becomes the highest priority, and if we can collectively push that idea to the nth degree around this country, then we can help. Now, there are many other good state chiefs in our country, and we work with them on a regular basis. Tom Luna, who's here today, who just got reelected, will head the Chief State School Officers Association. There are a number of others who are in the audience today, and we're actually talking with other chiefs about being involved in this really cutting edge, pushing the envelope kind of aggressive way of putting the children at the top of all of our decisions.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the little girl who was speaking to Doug Wilder, and she wanted to know about heroes. She thought they were all dead. Well, we have 5 living, breathing heroes with us here today. Can we have a round of applause for the Chiefs? Thank you.
On the front of your registration packets in your program, you're going to notice a little GPS system. Our theme for this year is Destination Excellence. And so as we are traveling on this trip, the Destination Excellence I will be your cruise director for the next 2 days. I'm Patricia Levesque again with the Foundation for Excellence in Education. I'm going to do a better job of keeping us on track on time, so I'm going to ask for your help because we do want audience Q&A, and we will have that for the CEO lunch session. Just a couple of logistical things. Staff all have red ribbon tags, so if you need anything for the next 2 days, go to the registration desk or ask a staffer. As you've seen 2 education documentaries this morning, USA Today called 2010 the year of the education documentary. For every keynote session, you're going to be seeing a preview, a trailer of an education documentary that we can give you more information if you want to find out about how to host town hall meetings or show some of these screenings with your constituents. We also, in your registration packet, you should have a little form that talks about some book signings. We have some fantastic speakers here for the next 2 days. They have their books and they will be autographing their books, so please check that out. There's also a cyber cafe where you can blog about your experience. A little card in your registration packet, so there are 5 different hashtags that you can use to follow the sessions. Let's see. We're also going to be, we're being covered by C-SPAN, so I just want you all to know that as you ask your questions this afternoon. We're going to be ending this session. We have strategy sessions that start in 15 minutes. Just exit the door behind you and go right and left, and we'll see you back here at noon. Thank you.
I proclaimed about 200.